for what we're planning on working on next. Just a reminder, we will be recording today. If you're unable to see or hear the presenter, let the moderator know, let me know in the chat box, and I will help you troubleshoot the best way I can. A lot of the times it's a headphones issue or a speakers issue, and knowing that the 3 dots, there's also a lot of options in there too about being able to pick up sound. So, but I'll help you troubleshoot that if there's an issue. Remember that this will be recorded at the top of the screen. Let me just get to the next slide there. At the top of the screen, you could dismiss that section there. And so you could it just reminds you that it's going to be recorded. I just want to give out a special shout out before we start right now that the whole equity and inclusive education team is here. There's Joanna Newton and our principal, Michelle Catino. Michelle, can you say a few words?
Hi, everyone. Just want to echo Priya's sentiments that I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're continuing the learning, and it's great to have you spending some time with us today.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And then a shout out to Joanna Newton's here too, part of the team. And yeah, let's begin. Jody, so we're going to start with, I'm going to introduce Jody Williams. She's our Indigenous Education Lead, and Isaac Murdoch, who a well-known artist, land protector, knowledge keeper. They'll both be presenting today, and we're very excited for you to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. It is an absolute pleasure to also work alongside with you, and it's been quite a journey navigating this technology. We have spent many hours on the phone trying to make sure we get this all right. So welcome everyone. As you may notice, I'm in my virtual classroom, just another little cool feature for Microsoft Teams. If you're not familiar with this and you want to have your own fancy virtual background, click on the 3 little dots and it'll pull up a menu. And in that menu, you'll see a thing that says Show Background Effects. And if you click on that, you get to choose a cool little background. Now it does depend on what device you're using. So if it's not showing up, it could be that. But yeah, that's just a side tidbit of info before we start. So let's get going. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So this resource we are going to be showcasing is Isaac was an instrumental part of putting this together, and it was in response to a huge need for treaty education and to support what that looks like in the classroom. And we decided this is produced through the First Nations, Metis and Inuit Education Association of Ontario. And it was in response to there's a lot of discussion around how do we teach this in a good way when many teachers themselves don't know this information. And so this was kind of a response to that. This was supposed to be a 3-part resource. It was funded through the ministry, and we never got past phase 1. So here we are. We've reached out to see about, hey, how about phase 2 and 3? So phase 2 was supposed to include more elaborate curriculum connections and specific activities that connect to these videos. But and then phase 3 was to branch out into a larger portion of Ontario. So this is a Southern Ontario perspective, and I really want to highlight and emphasize that there are many, many perspectives when it comes to Indigenous peoples, and it's very different across Ontario in terms of how treaties have come to be and what they look like. And so these are people that reside in Southern Ontario. However, there is, and Isaac's going to speak to this throughout the presentation today, there are there are some common themes that is important for everyone to know about, that really underpins the understanding between Canada and the relationship to the land and Indigenous peoples. So I'm going to switch over now to, I'm going to switch over to the website before we get into the rest of this. So Dufferin Peel does have a membership or a board membership to this site. If you're not familiar, because I do know that there's a few other people on from other school boards today, which is great. We welcome you as well. But if you're not sure about your password into this resource, then just send me an email and I'll share out the Dufferin Peel password. And if you're attending from another school board, you can reach out to your Indigenous lead and ask if you have a board license or membership purchased on your behalf. If not, you can sign up to become a member, and it's $50 for the individual membership. Just a note on membership, since we're on the topic. We had to switch. We are a subject association, and we had to switch over to a membership because when the new government came in, there was a huge cutback, if you recall, to a lot of the grants that we would typically access to provide this service to everyone. Myself and our council, we are volunteers, so all the work that we do, we don't get paid for, as with pretty much almost all subject associations. So it comes, these, you know, we do this to work together to provide resources that are really vetted, and we assure that anything that you're going to use from our site is appropriate and vetted. And part of that is due to having this Elders Advisory Council. So I just want to mention this too before we begin. So we have a provincial Elders Council, and most of these people, Priya, can you just put whoever that is on mute? Most of these people are fluent language speakers and also residential school survivors. And so they ensure, and they set the direction, and they ensure the work that we're doing is legitimate and valid. So when you go into this section, oh, I'm already logged in. Let me log out so you can see. So when you go to click on one of these tabs, it'll bring you to this login menu here. So I'm going to log in with our Dufferin Peel account. There is a section that's new called Student Resources. That is now open to the public. Where are we going? Okay, so down here, you're going to, in this toolbar here, you're going to go down to Inner Words. And this is the resource that we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to actually play you this video because it just kind of summarizes what it's about. And hopefully I've selected the sound on. Priya, let me know if you can't hear it.
We can hear. Sounds great.
So the Crown, when they went into treaty with the Anishinaabe, they were actually a nation of people. They had a land base, they had a government. The Crown dissolved because of democracy. And so nation to nation with who? You know, we've been banging our heads on an empty castle now for 100 years. We have land issues, huge land discrepancy issues that have to be made with. That has to be included. This discussion has to be included.
We never surrendered no land. Where we should be right now is in a clan system. That's our own system of government. This is the system that we're supposed to be under here.
New Canadians come in and need to know the true history. We're here to renegotiate what this truly means, because none of them are being honored. And what's being affected is the whole entire environment.
Educate yourself about the truth. Find out the history of that land. to share that with the new students, to share that with your teachers, share that with your principals, share that out. Help us spread the truth about the land.
We need the next generations to keep pulling the layers off, and so that they can hold the government to account. Because if you don't know your history, how do you sit across the table and defend your cause or defend your communities?
We have the residential school system. We have the Indian Act. There was a generation that was taken away. There's been a disconnect. That's what we're living today. So if we can just empower our people to believe in our own ways, then I believe that we can, stand our people back up again, to believe in our ways.
Sorry about that. So that just gives you a snippet of what is in this video series. And as you'll see here, we broke them down into segments. So they do actually, you could play them chronologically and they do, build into one kind of larger story, but we also wanted to break them down into components. And you'll see here, each one of them states like what are the main ideas that are being presented in each of these videos. So I think, for if you're just, learning about Indigenous peoples and learning about the story of Canada, this really helps to understand all the things that were and still are not being told to Canadians. So and again, Isaac is going to speak more deeply about this, but the truth is Canada was built off of stolen land and the dispossession and genocide of Indigenous peoples for the benefits of resource extraction. And so we can't ever, if we're going to be talking about even reconciliation, we can't even begin that discussion until, we have a better understanding as to what's really been going on. So I just want to draw your attention for a moment here to, of course, everything that we do, we connect it back into curriculum. And so just to kind of give an overview of the social studies and history curriculum, because this certainly can connect into other curricular areas, but just to dive in here for a bit. And again, just so that you see this flow of what's happening through the grade levels and where this information can fit in. But I do want to add in though, certainly a conversation in grade 3 is going to look very different than a conversation in grade 8 and grade 10 and grade 12. So it's important that it's scaffolded, that learning, and that we're not in the business of traumatizing kids for telling truths. We want to have this, we need to have this story now told in schools, but again, just be mindful as to the grade level that you're working with. So again, as we move into grade 7, grade 8, and grade 10, just to kind of give you an overview look as to what the conversation is going on through the grades. So one of the main, as hopefully you all know by now, we've had a revision to curriculum, and again, this was supposed to be a multi-phased approach. So phase 1, where the curriculum was not changed but enhanced to include learning about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So this is just an example from the grade 10, and you'll notice here where it says in framing questions and in big ideas as well. In what ways did government policy during this period create or contribute to divisions in Canadian society? How might different individuals and communities view the same event in different ways? So these are opportunities to look at, not everyone sees, for example, Sir John A. Macdonald as a hero. Why is that? Not everyone was okay with celebrating Canada's 150th birthday. Why is that? And so having those discussions to really dive in and understand what's at the core of this is really critical, that we do this in education, because ultimately you know, as educators, we are governed by the Ontario College of Teachers Standards of Practice. And as Catholic educators, we're also governed by the Catholic social teachings and our graduate expectations. And the core of the Catholic social teaching is human dignity. And so when we have, in the story of Canada, we have the ultimate abuse of human dignity, which is genocide. And we also have to have the conversation around the role of the Catholic Church that has been complicit in this genocide. However, we also can lean on our Catholic social teachings moving forward in how we respond to and teach this in our classrooms, so that we're actually moving forward collectively in a good way together. And certainly what you'll find when you hear Isaac speak is that at the core of this as well is our relationship to land. And so when we address these huge realities of colonization and genocide, what hopefully you'll start to uncover is that it's also a genocide of the land, and we have a call to our collective responsibility to take care of the land. And when I say land, I'm talking about all of creation. So, you know, that includes the little insects right up to, you know, the sky and the stars and the water, everything that is part of that web of life. So I'm going to turn it over to Isaac. And I really want to encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions, because like Isaac's very comfortable in answering those questions, and Priya can help to moderate those questions. And I know it's very natural when you're, especially if this is your first time, when you're hearing some of these truths, because they are quite shocking when you first hear them, because most people don't realize the truth about Canada, but it's really, really important that we hold the space for these truths to come out, so that we can actually respond to them moving forward. So Isaac, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Priya and Jody, for the wonderful opening and the introduction. I really appreciate all of the hard work and dedication that went into this resource. I think it's really, really good. I think I want to start right from the beginning. Let's start from contact. Because during contact, there was something called the doctrine of discovery that is played out through history and is still actually in the courts today. And for those of you that don't know what the doctrine of discovery is, it's basically the Catholic Church had granted powers, you know, to those that were Catholics to conquer and seize all lands of other people that were not Catholics. And of course, the Church of England, they kind of went their own way, and you know, they started to grant those powers for themselves. And so when they came to Turtle Island, there was a huge power struggle on who was going to be able to control the lands. And of course, we know that Samuel de Champlain, he put flags in at Sault Ste. Marie, in Montreal, in Quebec City, and he, of course, claimed that all of the waters that run into the Great Lakes, of course, were to belong to France. And the British did not like this one bit. Of course, the Spaniards and the Portuguese were more down in the south, doing their thing, using the doctrine of discovery. And essentially, most of North and Central and South America had some sort of a false or colored title placed on them through the doctrine of discovery. And so it was in 1757 when the French and the British decided to fight to see who could claim title to this land here, what we know as Canada. And of course, the British won on the Plains of Abraham, and they were able to, of course, lay claim. And they called all of this Crown land. And my people, the Anishinaabe people, were very, very upset about this. They thought, how could this be? And so, of course, this tension and this discrepancy gave birth to something called the Royal Proclamation, which happened in 1763, and it was a proclamation basically to the Indigenous people by the British that they would respect the Indigenous lands, but whatever you do, don't sell your lands to the French. And so that was the Royal Proclamation in a nutshell. At this time, my people decided to go to war, and they started to attack the British. And of course, they took 9 out of the 11 British forts, and there was a full-on battle that was taking place. So the British, of course, had to try to regain power or some stability. And so what they did was they came back a year later with something called the Treaty of Niagara. And they made some belts. They made the 24 Nation Wampum Belt, and they also made the Covenant Chain Wampum Belt. And they offered that to the Anishinaabe people. And basically what they said was that between our nations, there's a great chain. And whenever you need something, you pull on this chain, and whatever you want will come rolling down from our ship into your land, into your hands. And if we want anything, we'll tug the chain. And every year we're going to come together, we're going to polish this chain of silver. And so the wampum belt was quite significant. And so our people at that time did not know if we should kill the British or if we should enter into this agreement that they called Noctagawin. And so they had a ceremony. And during that ceremony, it was foretold that the newcomers were never going to stop coming across the ocean. And there's the picture of the belts there. And so they accepted those belts in good faith and friendship. And they agreed that at that particular time, that they would become trading partners. And that's what those belts represent. So in 1764, there was not a surrender. There was not a forfeit. It was an agreement of friendship and peace that we would trade with each other. And that's essentially what those agreements were. At that time, things were very political. And of course, the British started to take advantage of this new relationship, and they started to map out the resources that were in the territories, and they started selling lands that were Indigenous lands to settlers unauthorized. And this led to a lot of tension. And of course, Sir William Johnson, who was the chief Indian Affairs officer at the time, basically said that if we're always going to have these problems unless we come up with a formal agreement. So while this is going on, the Americans have already established themselves. They broke away from various different countries. They formed their own country. They were trying to develop a democracy, and they definitely wanted to have land. The British also definitely wanted to have land. And so basically what they did was, behind the scenes, they started to create the platform for a war. Because at that time, there was too many Indigenous people. We had too many warrior societies. There was far too many Indigenous people. And they had to try to thin out the warriors. And so behind the scenes, they created something called the War of 1812. There was puppet masters behind the scenes. If you can just imagine, just like any war, even today. And so they had their secret agendas. And it was through this war that they eliminated, they estimate, over half of the Indigenous warrior population. And once that was completed, then the British and the Americans could come together and they could define the boundaries of what the British wanted and what the Americans wanted. And that happened at the Treaty of Ghent in 1814 in Belgium. And of course, no Indigenous people were at that treaty. And so that's illegitimate line number one. So we do not recognize that that border because we didn't consent to it. We weren't involved with that, and that was the beginning of the land theft. And so the Treaty of Ghent, of course, gave the Americans a boundary. My people went to war against the British and against the Americans both. During the War of 1812, there was 30,000 Indigenous people that were fighting. There was at least 5,000 to 6,000, they called them half-breeds at the time, that were fighting for their independent homelands. And there was 5,000 British. And they say that there were 70,000 Americans that participated in that battle. Britain didn't have the financial backing for this war because they had spent it all trying to fight France in Europe. And so basically the Indigenous populations were used and taken advantage of, but it was also strategic to get rid of them as well, which they did. And so after the War of 1812, our people were very, very disappointed, and they said that it was a false lie that took place, and that they couldn't believe how sneaky people could be. Many of the Anishinaabe were shot in the back by the British. So when my great-great-grandfather got off the battlefield, he noticed that many of his warriors were shot in the back by the British, and he mentioned that several times. He was there when the general was shot, General Brock, and Brock gave him his sword, gave him his medals, his trinkets off his body, and said, "The British will always honor your independent Anishinaabe homeland. Just keep fighting." And of course, our people fought the Americans and pushed them all the way back to Ohio River. It was a huge battle that costed many lives. So after the War of 1812, our people were very disgruntled and very, very upset and hurt that the British had taken advantage of the situation behind the scenes. And so we have oral history, we have songs that talk about it, we have family history about it. And so we do not recognize that line because our Anishinaabe Nation goes all the way into Wisconsin, Minnesota. It goes into, of course, Michigan, right into North Dakota. And that we never agreed to have these foreign governments assert their title and jurisdiction over our lands at that time. So we consider them illegitimate. Of course, the British started to resource extract. Once that they call it the medicine line. Once the medicine line was created, the division between the United States and what is now Canada, Britain started to, of course, use the maps that they were developing for resource extraction, and they started to actually mine and log. And so again, my people were very upset, saying that you don't have the right to mine and log here. And they started a rebellion against the British. And again, it was my great-great-great-grandfather that led the rebellion. He was a bit of a disturber. So he's the one that started the War of 1812, and he's also the one that started the rebellion against the British. And what that did was that left the British in a position to say, look, we need to have a treaty. And so my people were saying, we need to have an agreement here because what's happening is not working, and our relationship has been tarnished beyond control. And so, the British were reminded of the Great Covenant change, and they were also reminded of good old Noggin-a-Naw, the dish with one spoon wampum bill that we had as nations, and that their lines did not have no impact on us because as nations we're a free people. We have our own government, we have our own laws, we have our own nationhood, we have our own language, we had our own self-sustaining economy. We were not dependent on the British or the Americans at that time. And they were reminded in good faith that they needed to uphold the integrity that they showed during the Treaty of Niagara. And this gave birth to, in my area, what's called the Robinson-Huron Treaty. And what was agreed upon was that the settlers were not to dig deeper than the width of a plow, unless it was to bury their dead. Because our people believed that there was great powers in the ground, and that there were serpents, and there was animals, powerful beings that lived in the ground, and that if we dug those up, if we dug up the ground, we'd release that power and it could destroy the earth. And so that was the very first agreement, that under no circumstances was anybody to dig deeper than a plow, other than to bury the dead. And that's how it was supposed to be. It was also agreed that we were to protect each other's children during times of famine, during times of war, and during times of sickness. It was agreed that we would protect the children from each other, and that we would make sure that the families were looked after. It was agreed that the British way of life would be in compliance with the natural laws, and that we would not disturb them. We would not bother their farms. We would not steal from them. We would not kill them. That they would have free passage through the waters, and that we would respect each other's life, and that the British were to respect our way of life on the land, and that they were to respect our hunting and our gathering and our laws and all of those things. And it was said too at the time that the length of 6 men on every shoreline of every waterway was to be undisturbed, so that if people needed to sleep when they were traveling by canoe, they would always have a place to sleep, because they were worried that there was going to be so many settlers that they would take all of the waterways, and the Anishinaabe would have nowhere to sleep. And so that was the agreement that was said, and there was boundaries that were made. So in my area, it was all the way from Baating, which is Sault Ste. Marie, all the way to Perry Sound, and straight north to where the watershed turns the other way. And it was agreed that for the tribes of my people in our region, that was going to be a treaty place where settlers could come and live. And it was understood that as Anishinaabe people, that we already had inherent responsibilities to the earth already, and that we didn't receive anything from them, that this was a gesture of kindness and good faith to the British, that they would be able to come in and through the treaty receive treaty responsibilities and have the good fortune and the privilege to be able to live in these beautiful lands, and that together we would forge a beautiful life together by respecting our diversity and by respecting our way of life with each other. And so that was the treaty process that took place. During that time, there were several lawyers that were supposed to be present for the time to advocate for the Anishinaabe people. They were banned. Some of them were killed, and one of them was poisoned, and they were not allowed at the treaty signing. And what the treaty actually says is that it's a cede and surrender forever, and that mining would be given special privileges. And so we know that the written documents are false. Our people would never surrender all the lands forever and give mining special privileges, because it went against all of our cultural values. And we fought so hard to protect our homelands. Why would we just give it up single-handedly, all to the British and receive nothing in return? And so after that happened, the old man died. Chief Shingwak died, my great-great-grandfather. And the British, the colonies, broke away and they formed their own government, which is now known as Canada. They confederated, and in 1867, they formed Canada. And then shortly after, because the people were beginning, starting to uprise again, they formed something called the Indian Act. And that's when the full-on genocide started to happen with our people. And so the Indian Act was basically legislation that was created by the government to get all of the Indigenous people off the land, contained on the reservations, where they could be filtered into colonization through Catholic institutions. And that's what happened. So when I was 5 years old, I was taken away by Indian agents off the land, off the reserve, and I was forced into Catholic institutions as a way of colonization. Because we were known as the Indian problem. We were a free people with our own government, our own laws, our own language, our own economy. And so, of course, we were the Indian problem because we were what was in the way of the full-on resource extraction that the Canadian government wanted to do. And so they invested a lot of money into the removal of Indigenous people off the lands and into colonization via the Indian Act. And so I was a product of that as a child. So was my parents, so was my grandparents, and so were my great-grandparents. And so my daughter's 7 years old, and she's the first child in my bloodline in over 120 years that has not been taken away by Indian agents and forced into colonization. And so this history goes back a long ways. Of course, the generational effects of the Indian Act, of residential schools, of forced assimilations, has had tremendous impacts on our families. And because of the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, the physical abuse that took place, a lot of our families were left decimated and living in habitual trauma. And because the Indian Act, it kind of leaves us always in perpetual poverty all the time. And so the government controls the economies on the reserves, and they use a programs and services model that's managed through Indian Affairs. And that's why Indian and Northern Affairs are always attached together. So in order to have Northern Affairs, which is mining, logging, fossil fuel development, you have to control the Indian population. That's why those two departments are always clumped together. So when Doug Ford came into power, we fought so hard to separate those departments. The very first thing he did, his very first act, was put those two departments together. And so the trauma that happens to the land is equivalent to the trauma that's happening to our bodies and our spirits as Indigenous people. And so where I come from, there was 11 uranium mines, and they left the third world's largest nuclear waste site on the planet. And the tailing dams, some of them broke, leaving hundreds of millions of tons of radioactive waste into our watershed. And for years and years, our community didn't have clean drinking water. And, my daughter, we used to have to put a red bag around the taps so that she would know that was danger and that if she drank the water, she could die. But all of the white towns and villages around us all had clean drinking water except us. And they estimate that the mines profited and made between $9 and $11 trillion during the Cold War. And so we were left in an ecological deficit. And it was the Indian Act, it was the policies of the government of genocide that made that possible. And so right now our people, there's a lot of questions. Where's the Crown? The Crown lost its power to democracy. They're not the same entity we went into treaty with. The provinces, they were made without the consent of Indigenous people. How are they able to get authority over lands? That was not agreed upon. And of course, the Canadian government, they formed a government and asserted power over our lands without our consent. And so our lands were stolen. And so Indigenous people are saying we need some of our lands back. And there's lots to go around. And there should be no reason to force your nationhood on another person. And part of how they did this was they started to educate the Canadian society generations ago through mapping. And so it was through mapping. You teach each generation of children that this is Canada, these are the provinces, these are the jurisdictions, this is Crown land. And generation after generation after generation, people believe it to be true because that's what's being taught in school. And we were completely erased. Our history was erased. The lies were erased. The thefts were erased. The true history and genocide of what happened to Indigenous people were erased. But we're still here, and we're multiplying like rabbits. And so this Indigenous land issue is something that's going to keep coming up. Just in the past 11 years, our population has doubled. We are the fastest growing population on the planet. And so Canada has to deal with these land issues because reconciliation cannot happen without resolving these land issues. And so, how do we do this? We do this through education. We do this by exposing these uncomfortable truths, and we start moving forward. Right now, Canada is losing every single case against Indigenous people simply because they do not have the proper documentation. They do not have the proof to back up that they have jurisdiction over our lands. And so, it's time to change. And every time that there's a discrepancy, we shouldn't have to go to court. There should be a consensus amongst Canadians that yes, something went terribly wrong in the past, and we have to fix this. And that we don't have to go to court. And so right now the Canadian government is using poverty politics. They contain our economies on the reserves. They give us just enough, and they keep us tied up in these court battles that they don't give us money for. And it exhausts all of our resources and energies. And that's not right. That's unethical. That's not moral. And we need kind-hearted people that have good values of compassion and faith to say, look, we need to resolve these issues. Because what happened to Indigenous people was a genocide. It's still happening. And we're in climate change. We're suffering a massive ecological collapse. And Indigenous people have, very valuable information about how to live on these lands. And we need to partner up. And we need to celebrate each other's diversity and try to do what we can to resolve a lot of these issues regarding the ecology, regarding climate change, regarding, just our relationship in general. And so a lot of work and education has to take place, and we need to be included into the mapping. We need to be included in the history. So when you look at a map of Canada, we're not there. We're systematically not there on purpose. When you steal somebody's land, you don't put them on there. You take them out. But we're still here. And like I said, there's lots to go around. And so I believe that together, when we really look at these hard issues, we're smart people. We can work together. We can figure these things out, and we can come up because what COVID taught me is that being dependent on is probably not the best thing, because First Nations people are falling through the cracks, and we don't have the land base, to sufficiently sustain ourselves. So we're thinking of food security, health security, water security, all of those things. We don't have a land base. And so we're kind of stuck in these cluster housing situations on the reserves. that are ticking time bombs because many of the reserves don't have clean drinking water. And so we know that the setup is very detrimental when it comes to communicable diseases, and that we need a bigger land base. We need to work through our issues, and we have to do it together. And we have to be proud of the good work that we do to fix the things of the past, to make a better future, not just for First Nations, but for everybody. Because First Nations people, they do have intricate traditional knowledge about these lands here that can benefit society in a whole when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the ecological collapse. And not including Indigenous people into those discussions is not a good move. Indigenous people have something to say, and we need the space and the platform to be able to do that good work. Which is why I like Jody and Priya, because they kind of let me come on these spaces and ramble on. But I believe in people. I believe in humanity. I refuse to believe that the problems of the past, have to be inherited in the same fashion to the future. That we can start over again. That we can start looking at things in a different way, and we can come up with solutions that work for everybody. That includes the animals, that includes the trees, that includes the birds, and that includes the sky. We need to fix this world, because this absolute free-for-all and resource extraction for economic benefit is simply not working. The globalization of Western education is wiping out Indigenous knowledges all over the planet, and it's not providing sustainable economies. And so we need to change what we're doing, what we're teaching, what we're learning. And Indigenous people can help. And not just from here, but Indigenous people all over the world. And when you really think about it, everybody, every human on the planet, when they look in their background, when they look deep enough into their family history and their cultural fabric, they will find too that they also lived their life without a garbage can and lived in accordance to the natural laws. So let's celebrate our diversity and build each other up and create something really beautiful. And I think we can do that. And I think it's a perfect time right now. Why wait? So at this time, I'd like to take some questions. That was a big breath, so I'm just going to breathe now that I got that out. And we'll take some time for some questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Isaac, for sharing so eloquently as you always do. Perhaps while we wait to see if there's some questions, I do want to just maybe comment on this. As we, as educators, we have a really great opportunity to lean on the inquiry process. And inquiry means for a teacher that you're not at the front of the classroom leading, spilling out the knowledge and the expectation that you have all the answers. The inquiry really is an opportunity to invite us as educators to go on a co-learning journey with our students. So I'm just going to share this slide up here with you all, because when you talk about mapping, and it's interesting because, again, through propaganda, the government will say, oh, there's about 640 or whatever the number is, First Nations, which then gives this incorrect notion of, when we talk about actual self-determining nations versus reserve. So, even in the language that the government uses, it's trickery. So maybe you can just comment a little bit about and make the connection in with the Indian Act and the reserve system and in regards to loss of land. And I also found this other map that I thought was quite interesting that I just threw up here. And I think this is where, when we talk about inquiry, like, here's a map I just found that has these little triangles on them that are active mines. So when we talk about, resource extraction, and look at where the triangles are, and now let's go back and look at where all these little dots are. And so hopefully through inquiry, we can start to make those connections between when you talk about clean water in communities and the link to the devastation caused by resource extraction. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the are located near potential mining sites, and that's because a lot of these mining sites were considered sacred sites, and so of course they were living near them, and so it's not a coincidence that a majority of the communities that are living near the mine sites in habitual severe poverty with no drinking water. They were forced on those reserves. They don't have an economy. They've been forced off the land, and essentially they've been placed on welfare and programs and services dollars, and in these cluster housing projects that are worse than third world conditions. And yet they live right beside these multi-billion dollar mining companies. And these corporations have been given billions and billions of dollars to consult with First Nations people. They never gave us billions of dollars to consult with them. They gave them billions of dollars to consult with us. And so what they do is they give industry all of the money, and they start taking the money they give away First Nations in a bid for us to sign deals with these companies. And like I said, our cultural fabric is in the land. We want to preserve we're in abrupt climate change. The world is suffering a massive ecological collapse. Indigenous people do not want to sign deals. And that's the poverty politics that are at play. And so even during COVID-19, when most of the First Nation communities are in lockdown, the government is actually forcing these pipelines through right now without the consent of First Nations people. And so the direct link to land and economy and ecology is it's the same thread. So for many Indigenous people, there is no difference between ecology and economy. It's the same thing. Because when you look at food security and sustainability, you have to have a vibrant and alive ecosystem to be able to provide food for your people. And that's what's being destroyed. And that's something that we need to protect. And so right now, land is the issue. There is no question. We can do this peacefully. We can do this with diplomacy and with integrity. We can do this with being in good form and having good taste. But what it's going to take, it's going to take people, it's going to take average Canadians to say, you know what? Yeah, it's time for a change. This is wrong. What's happening is not benefiting anything. And right now, our young people are rising up because they see this. And more so than ever, we're seeing young people side with Indigenous people by the hundreds of thousands and saying, look, we need to change the face of this country because it's not working. The formula is not working. Whatever formula that they put out there, it's not working. The world is dying. And so it's going to take the teachers and the educators to start making those brave and bold moves of telling the truth, but also let's work towards solutions. It's not my job to fix Canada. That's Canada's job. My job is to try to build up our governments and our people and our sustainability. I have my own job over here. I can't fix Canada. And so it's going to take average Canadians to make those bold and brave steps to say, hey, look, something went terribly wrong here, and we demand something better. We demand justice for Indigenous people. We demand justice for the lands and waters, and we demand justice for our society. And we can do this, and we're going to do this. And it all starts with education, because if it was education that intertwined these these lies and the thefts and the irrational beliefs into society, then education can unwind them and start putting out different values and beliefs that we need. And I believe that the Catholic School Board is built on those principles. And so Catholic schools have a moral and ethical responsibility, not only, number one, to put pressure on the Pope to, apologize to Indigenous people for what has happened, but to also try to make things right in terms of language revitalization, land-based activities for people. You know, the Catholic School Board gets billions of dollars. And First Nations people, like, did you know that I was reading this, one school got more money than 100 First Nations together? There's an inequity of what's happening in terms of where the money's going. And we need the Catholic school boards and the Catholic institutions to start investing back into the ecology, back into the language, back into the justice issues that First Nations people have. Simply because the Catholic institutions had a huge part in the genocide against Indigenous people. And as educators, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to tell the truth, but also to give back. That's how we make things right. And to hold the Pope, the bishops, we need to hold them accountable and say, look, where's the apology? The Anglican Church apologized and gave millions and millions of dollars to Indigenous people for language revitalization. And so right now we're struggling with language. So here's the grid. So the English language will get $417. The French language will get, I think it's $27. And the native language will get $0.5. And so we know that the ratio in language is way, way off. And so we deserve reconciliation. And part of that is language restoration, land restoration, and relationship restoration. And these are critical things in moving forward. And so I always tell, people that are building resources, if you're building resources for Indigenous people or about Indigenous people, then you have to include the language. That's your responsibility. And so I'm really proud with Jody and her team because they do that. And, I encourage everybody to get involved and find ways to support Indigenous people and their efforts. Because, like I said, the genocide is still active. It's still happening. And right now, 10% of my total tribe's population is in childcare. And so we know that the systemic racism is still built into the gears of the legal system, of the child welfare system. It's certainly in the gears of the political system, and it's really in the gears of the education system. We just don't see it, and we don't know it. So we have to expose it, and that's how we change things.
Isaac, I just want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the shift that we're trying to do in education. And you and I have had many conversations around this. And it all stems from, and this is part of why this resource was developed. And it's looking at what have we been doing in the past in education? What do we see in our classrooms? What have we grown up with as representation of Indigenous people? And part of the colonization plan and propaganda is to keep Indigenous knowledge systems devalued. And so we only see a sliver of representation of Indigenous peoples. So for example, we see a lot of this, right? So this is what we are trying to now move away from, because what it's done is just minimize and tokenize what Indigenous knowledge systems are and the incredibly diverse and sophisticated knowledge that they have. And as you mentioned earlier, we have an opportunity to really work together in partnership and learn about the land here, because the Indigenous peoples from this land and through the language understand the interconnectedness, the medicines, how we're supposed to interact with the land. So when we talk about our job as educators in the work of anti-racism education, really what we're trying to get at here in our shift away from cultural tokenism is really going deeper into understanding the complexities of racism. So, for example, and why is it that we've, when we think about what did we learn about Inuit people, probably most of you had the experience of, building a sugar cube igloo, or the toilet paper roll totem poles are very popular, things like that. So really what that's doing is it's reinforcing racism, and it's actually causing harm, and it's actually a form of violence in the classroom. And so we're trying to educate people, myself included, to recognize this and help to shift that practice. So when we think about, those romanticized notions of who Indigenous people are, when we're, because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, I'm just trying to, I'm just trying to honor you, or I'm just trying to, create a space that looks quote unquote Indigenous. Or is it, that without, and again, this is not about intention. I think that 99.9% of educators are equipped with good intentions. It's not about I didn't intend to cause harm. But if we don't take a critical look at white supremacy and how that has manifested in so many ways, that creates almost an invisibility of it. So I really like these quotes that I put up on the screen here to share, because this is what has led to this, and this is what we are trying to now move away from. And so in FNMIEAO, we've established a policy that was just passed right before March break, and so we're on the great pause right now. But that policy is to ensure moving forward that there's accountabilities put back in place, because this is actually breaking laws. And so I think we also have to have the conversation around recognizing that this is a human rights violation, and it's breaking laws. And so when we think about it from that perspective, I think it puts a bit more seriousness to it, as opposed to, oh, well, what's the big deal? Oh, it's just this or that. So sorry, I rambled on there. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Isaac.
Yeah, I think that you really hit the nail on the head. I think that when these things happen, that it dilutes and it also misrepresents the essence of First Nations people. And so I think that we need to look beyond those types of activities and start looking at what can we do to erase these stereotypes that happen, and how do we effectively build proper relationships with Indigenous people, like with real Indigenous people, and start moving forward in a different way that's compatible for everybody. And so, the white supremacy, it does exist. Lots of times when I tell people, when you come to my home at NULLIUS, you're actually leaving Canada, and you're entering into something different. And I don't know how many times people said, "What do you mean I'm leaving Canada? This is Canada." And it's like, well, actually, no. Why are you saying that? Because this is Anishinaabe King. This land is there's a treaty here, and Canada was made without our consent, and the land was stolen from us, and we don't appreciate people to uphold the theft, and we see that all the time in schools, and people don't know the history, so they don't know that they're doing it. And lots of times when people do find the history, they still have this mindset, well, get over it. Well, we can't get over it because those systems are destroying the earth. And we need to come together and celebrate each other's diversity and work together so that we can fix these problems, so that we can make the world a better place for the future. And so, tokenizing Indigenous, practices don't help, but by celebrating the resiliency, not only of Indigenous people, but each other, it builds an energy where we can actually start to build each other up. So one thing that my grandmother always said, my mother said this too. She said, always be for something as opposed to against something. She says, don't be against colonialism. Build up your traditional systems. Be for that. Don't be against a pipeline. Be for a river, because there's more power in that. If you're for a river, then everybody can join you. Any race, any culture, any age, any gender can be with you because they're for something beautiful. So instead of trying to tear down something ugly, build up something beautiful. And the energy of that will create the revolutionary change that we need in the world today. And so that's where I put my focus on, is trying to create beautiful. And, teachers have, such an incredible opportunity to be able to create beautiful with their students, to open their minds and expand them in a different direction where things are going to be okay, where our kids feel safe. And right now, our kids need to feel that. They need to know that change is happening so that they can see themselves as having a future. And right now, lots of kids don't feel like they have a future in this world. And so it's up to us as adults and leaders and educators to start to inspire them and to build up those spaces where they can create those opportunities and create that beautiful and create that energy and that positive revolution of the heart that we need for change. This is serious. This story that we're in now will be told 1,000 years from now, no doubt. People will be sitting around a campfire and, they'll be telling this story of when the two-legged tried to destroy the earth. And we're the characters of that story. We're the ones, somehow the chosen ones to be in this story. And so it's up to us to create the next chapter. And I truly believe that no matter what we do, if it's for the good and if it's for the beautiful, it'll make a difference for the next generation. But we have to try. And part of it, the magic of it all, is we have to do it together. We can't work in silos anymore. We have to come together and collectively build each other up and, use each other's gifts, support each other's gifts to make the world a better place. And as responsible, ethical, and moral adults that have the children's best needs at heart, we can do this together. There's nothing that says we can't do this. Actually, we could change the world in an instant if people just got on board, And so, start organizing with other teachers. Start getting the kids to start organizing. Create fundamental change. When young people gather together and when they start gathering in numbers, there's nothing adults can do. There's nothing that even law can do, because they become something about young energy. So feast that young energy, feed that young energy so that they can get out there and be the change that's necessary. I really believe that in our lifetime, we will see a massive revolution for change. And it's already starting to happen. And so we need to get on board. We need to show good leadership. We want to make sure that people are safe, that this revolution is positive, that it's nonviolent, and that people join together in goodwill, and that they work together. So no more rights-based agendas, because rights-based agendas goes like this: I have a right and I have a right, and we're going to fight to find out who has the right. But when you have a responsibility-based agenda towards all of your peoples and to the diversity, then that's when everybody can come together and create the beautiful. And that's what we need to do right now. Miigwech, thank you.
So I'm just going to share here our contact information. We've come to the end of today, and in the chat box there, I've shared a few other links. So one of the questions that had been asked was, are there some concrete resources or organizations that we can support as settlers to move things forward? So yeah, that's a great question, and I know that's often what people are thinking about. So just as Isaac was saying, anything that's going to inspire solidarity and direct action is so great to, again, get students involved with. So you can use this resource that we've talked about today, either directly in your classrooms or just for your own personal information. I really encourage you to take the time and go through those resources, watch the videos, think about ways that you can make those connections. I've shared another resource that has just been revamped, and we had a webinar on it recently. This again was in collaboration with Isaac. The link is lessonsfromearthandbeyond.ca. I do see that somebody has posted here, it seems to have problems and coming up as unsafe. I'm not sure why that is. I'll have to look into that. And maybe I put the link. Okay, so clearly I put the link in wrong. I will fix that.
Hi, Jody. Jody, I just
hi.
put up the link again. I put the link up.
Thank you, Priya.
Okay.
Christina's asking, what would you say if a teacher were to encounter resistance? Christina, resistance from either admin or through their parish regarding teaching the truths. So this is why we've established policy, and we have an Indigenous education, what used to be called advisory council, and is no longer advisory. It's actually part of board governance, and so the reason why we put it into policy was to help with accountability and enforcement. So you know, as I said, most of the time it's education and awareness. And when people are being told, you know, that's not appropriate to be doing in your classroom or your schools, we get a very positive response. But this isn't up for negotiation. And so, you know, I would encourage that you could send an email to myself, or even better to Michelle Catino. She's the principal, and she's the one that will take care of that and have those conversations to make sure that people in classrooms and schools are following what we have set out for the expectations happening in classrooms and schools.
So Jody, I would also add, it's Michelle, hi everyone.
Hi.
Hi, I think the issue comes with people are fearful and they think it's going to be a blame game, and that's not really what the message is. So that's why these conversations are so important. So if there is resistance, don't feel like you have to take that on your own. Flip it to us, and we'd be happy to negotiate that and help people in their understanding of what the actual message is.
Thank you, Michelle. So another comment here, I will do what I can to move forward and bring the revolution of the heart to my students. Awesome. Yes. So yeah, so the also Priya is going to put the feedback link in the chat box, but we will also follow up with an email that has the feedback link, and we will also include the recording to this webinar. And we will be we have another webinar planned for Thursday. So if you haven't registered for that, you can do that. And also we are working with Isaac to do virtual visits in the classroom. And this was a huge experiment, but it's turned out to be fantastic. Wouldn't you say, Isaac?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been really cute, especially with the littler ones. You know, it mostly becomes a Q&A, and it's a great opportunity for kids to just ask, you know, any question that they're wondering about, or we can also cater it to a topic that you're particularly interested in or focusing on in your learning. So so we'll also share out that link if you didn't get it as well. And then we are planning some more webinars for the month of May. So in that feedback, great way to let us know what you're interested in and to keep the conversation going. And of course, at any time along your journey, please, if you're not sure about anything, just send me an email. And I certainly don't have all of the answers. However, I got really good people to go to that I often check in with and ask, you know, what do you think of this? Or, you know, through our Indigenous Education Council as well. So yeah, so this is we encourage collaboration and dialogue and asking questions. And, you know, we've already shared out in previous webinars the amazing work that's happening in schools in our board that have just been so powerful in terms of the learning that's taken place and the interaction with students.
Yes, absolutely. So for everybody out there, I want you to be safe. I want you to reflect on what was said, and, you know, ask the questions. You know, get a hold of these people and ask them the questions. And because I think that you'll find that, you know, as we move forward, if we move forward together, then we win. We win. And so this is how we do it. We actually build relationships. We ask the questions. We have these weird conversations, and we win. We will win in the end. But the main thing is building relationships. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to be with me today, and to be with Jody and Priya, and to, of course, listen to what we had to say. And, you know, we're always available to help out. And so thank you so much. And again, be safe. And let's get through this COVID thing too at the same time. Miigwech, thank you.
Jody, Isaac, sorry, just to interrupt, just before you guys all log off, there are 3 things that have been posted into the chat box. The first is the exit ticket for our webinar for today. The second is the Visiting Virtual Knowledge Keepers program. If you would like to sign up, there's a form you would have to fill out, and I will contact you shortly with a date. And then the last one is Resources for Equitable and Inclusive Education. It's a collection of resources that's been created by Joanna Newton for teachers to be using during this time. So they're great resources that are here, but I will also be posting it in an email later as well. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Isaac, for your knowledge and your time. We appreciate everything you bring. Thank you, participants, for your comments and your questions. Please stay safe, please stay healthy, and take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.